Now entering the dead zone. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper into the corner. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him. And the leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good. He's 5'7", 179 pounds. A junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. My name is Steve Dace. I want to thank all of you subscribing to us here on YouTube, also via iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you want just the audio version, you can get it there. Our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast, which helps us to get the word out about this podcast each and every week as well. So if you like what we're doing here, please click like on this video, share the link, do the same, positive reviews on YouTube and iTunes. Do a lot to help us get the word out about what we're doing here at Michigan Podcast. And as always, you can follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. You ever miss an episode or anything we write, all of that is available. Easy to use website, MichiganPodcast.com. Well, of course, we're getting ready to start Big Ten play this week for the Wolverines. Bill Bender from the Sporting News. He will be joining us a little bit later on in this week's episode to preview the landscape of the Big Ten. We'll have our updated Big Ten power ratings, if I voted in the AP Top 25, and more. But we have to begin with the game against Air Force. Phenomenal defensive effort, first of all. It's very difficult to outrush Air Force. Michigan did. And the way they played against a triple option offense and a program that's only not been bowl eligible once in the last 10 years, extremely impressive. Air Force had one incredibly well-designed pass play where they fooled us for a touchdown, and then other than that, Michigan's defense was in complete control. Michigan's special teams, other than a few more Will Hart shanks that I'm losing patience with, special teams, again, outstanding. Donovan Peoples-Jones gets his first ever punt return for a touchdown. The freshman, a 74-yarder. There's a reason why Troy Calhoun, the Air Force coach, said that if Michigan only played with its defense and special teams and no offense each week, they'd still be bowl eligible. Now, that might be a little over the top, but the point remains the same. Michigan is outstanding on both of those sides of the ball. Quinn Nordine already a weapon as the kicker. And then there's the offense. Now, last week we talked a lot about youth. We talked a lot about timing. We talked a lot about patience. All those things are still applicable. But there's really one part of the offense that's holding Michigan back at the moment. And it's the fact that for Michigan's offense, the red zone has become the dead zone. Last year, Michigan was cash money, homie, in the red zone. But this year, Michigan has only converted one of its 10 red zone trips into a touchdown all season. Only one other team in all of college football, 130 teams, is worse. Michigan is tied, by the way, for 128th, which means only one other team is worse at red zone offense than they. And, hey, the game against Purdue this week, it's going to get decided in the red zone, guys. Purdue is 9 for 12 on touchdowns in the red zone this year. 9 for 12 on touchdowns in the red zone, and Michigan 1 for 10. Why is Michigan struggling in the red zone? How about this stat? Michigan has 20 rushes in the red zone for 36 total yards, guys. 20 rushes for 36 total yards. Now, for those of you new to the sport of American football, that sucks. I mean, that's really bad. Like, awful. Terrible. Like, systemically so. Like, you should get the handoff and come to the line of scrimmage, fall down, and get 36 yards on 20 carries. That's really, really bad. But wait, there's more. Wilton Speight, you want to talk about really bad? Not about these apples. Wilton Speight, passing in the red zone this year, you ready for this? 1 for 13 for -1 yard. 1 for 13 for -1 yard is Wilton Speight passing the ball in the red zone, Freudian slip, in the red zone this year. Again, for those of you new to intercollegiate American football, that sucks. That's systemic suckitude is what that is. And then there's one more. Michigan targeted its tight ends only once in 23 passes on Saturday. That's bad enough. None of them, though, were in the red zone. Once out of 23 passing attempts, Michigan targeted its tight ends. We've recruited this all-star lineup of tight ends, only targeted them once out of 23 passing attempts, and not a single time in the red zone. So those numbers don't lie. I mean, that performance is appalling. It is pathetic. It is putrid. But here's why I'm optimistic. We're too good for that to continue. I mean, at some point, those numbers are going to turn around. We just have too good of players, too good of coaches. That's not going to continue. Michigan's not going to finish the year. Don't give me, so maybe they suck like this in the red zone against Cincinnati and Air Force. They'll do this against Penn State and Ohio State. The law of averages say when you have good players, there's a reason why we're tied with Georgia State. Not even Georgia State. Because teams that suck have numbers like that. Even teams that are good but overrated have much better numbers. Put it this way, if we were even, the national average is around 60% touchdown conversion ratio in the red zone. If we were below average the last 2 weeks against Cincinnati and Air Force and at 50%, that's another 8 points added to the scoring margin in each of those games, and suddenly you're beating Cincinnati 43-13, 43-14, and suddenly you're beating Air Force 37-13. That makes the whole complexion of those games look a lot different and a lot closer to what our preseason expectation level was and even our game week expectation level was. So this just isn't going to continue. Now, they may never be a great red zone team this year with all the moving parts and a still developing offensive line, but they're not going to be 10%, guys. They may not be the national average. They may not even be above the national average. But with the way we play defense, if we were 75th in the nation in red zone offense, we would be a very good football team. So this is why I'm optimistic despite the painful witnessing of dead zone offense we've seen the last 2 weeks. And yes, I'm as frustrated as the rest of you are. You should see my reaction and maybe listen to it in the man cave every Saturday watching this. It can't continue. The players are too good. The coaches are too good. Those stats are too low. Eventually, water will reach its level and it will even out. What you hope, though, is that happens before you lose a football game you otherwise should have won. Like maybe this Saturday.
And they break Ty Isaac over the left side, over midfield. Nardine puts a foot to it. It's got the distance. It's high enough, and it's good. Speight throws the screen left. It's Peoples-Jones, and Peoples-Jones turns the corner at the 30. He's out to the 40 and near midfield. Back to throw Speight. Good time. Throws. He's got his tight end. Kicks it up. A lot of distance, a lot of height, and it's good. Right through for Quinn Nardine. They go option right. And Worthman, the quarterback, will be taken down. Good snap. Ball's down. Kick is up. Lots of distance. And the kick is good.
Way to go,
And good from a long ways. Good snap. Kick is away. Big, high spiral. Peoples-Jones back to the 22. Breaks it around the left side, got some room. He's at the 40. He's at midfield, breaking over to the right. In front of the Air Force bench. Down to the 30, down to the 20, and down to the 5, and into the end zone. Touchdown, DPJ. On the option left is Worthman. Turns the corner, and then,
That's a fumble.
that is a fumble, and it's Speight the shotgun. Here comes pressure. Speight throwing. He's got his man for a 29-yard attempt. Moore puts the ball down. The kick is up. It is in that direction, and it is through. Worthman looks and throws a reverse at him. Good play by the corner, and they will stop. Peoples-Jones is pushed back to his own 30. Breaks around the right end. Does he get the corner? He does. Up to the 40, 45, and midfield. It'll be a 36-yard attempt. Kick is up. Plenty of distance, and it is good. They go option left. They get pushed back. Worthman is going to lose yardage. That play was blown up. Worthman up under center. Has a man in motion. Pitch sweep right. McVay. He's going to lose yardage. Stravel will try from the 19. Kick is up. The kick is no good.
Oh, yeah.
Higdon breaking around the left end. Higdon may go. 10-5. Touchdown, Michigan.
Are you looking to put the ball in your court, your actual court, like this sweet maize and blue Jumpman court? Sport Court of Michigan has you covered if that's you. Yes, even if that's you, Sparty. They can cover you as well, from basketball to tennis to batting cages to hoops. If you need anything athletic in your backyard, just give them a call. Based out of Michigan and ready to install your court sooner than you would expect. If you're in the Southeast Michigan area or in Ann Arbor, Tim Barnes will personally walk you through the process of having your dreams of a professional court in your backyard. Visit sportcourtmi.com, sportcourtmi.com if you're in Michigan. Now, if you're outside of Southeast Michigan and need a hoop for your driveway or yard, Sport Court's got you covered there as well at monsterhoops.com. Monsterhoops.com. They'll ship it right to your door. Now, if you go to monsterhoops.com, mention the Michigan podcast, and you can save $100 on a Monster Hoop. That's right. Mention the Michigan podcast, save $100 on a Monster Hoop. If you mention Michigan podcast at sportcourtmi.com, you can save up to $1,000 on a backyard court, up to $1,000. Depending on the package you selected. So, monsterhoops.com, sportcourtmi.com. Those are the websites you're looking for, and tell them Michigan Podcast sent you. And now, as Big Ten play gets set to begin for the Wolverines and for most of the rest of the Big Ten, other than Ohio State and Indiana, let's preview where the league stands with Bill Bender from The Sporting News. He's their chief college football writer. In fact, he joined us on one of our very first ever episodes of Michigan Podcast. So, Bill, it's a pleasure to have you back, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, and I appreciate it. And, like you, looking forward to the start of as Big Ten conference play really gets going this weekend.
Give us sort of a national perspective, Bill, overall on where the league is, where it stands. Now, I will confess to you, I can't stand the whole conference. My conference can beat up your conference debate, right? Like, SEC fans can chant SEC all they want. No Mississippi State fan has ever gone out and bought themselves a Alabama national championship shirt, okay? But we live in an era because of the college football playoff that, unlike college basketball, where a lot of these teams across the country, big-name teams, play each other in November and December, we don't get too many of those matchups. And when you've got those 4 coveted slots in the playoffs and the bulk of your schedule is played within teams or played among teams within your own conference, it is very important from that perspective to know where a conference stands. So from that perspective, Bill, what is the national perception of the Big Ten heading into conference play?
Well, I kind of agree with you. I don't get hung up on is my conference is better than your conference, but I do look at which conferences have the most playoff contenders. And I say that in terms of, with the Big Ten, you've got 4 legitimate playoff contenders, whether it's Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin. Can any other conference really say that? The Big 12's probably got 2. The SEC's probably got 2.5. Pac-12's got 2, and the ACC probably has too. So, I mean, that's where the Big Ten has the depth in terms of teams that you can actually get to the playoff, and that's going to lead to some big-time games down the road.
There was a lot of talk going into the season. The top of the Big Ten could match with just about any other league in the country, but that the bottom was really bad. Illinois was bad. Purdue was bad. Rutgers was bad. I mean, well, Rutgers was historically bad last year. I mean, Michigan played them in a game where I believe we had more touchdowns than they had first downs. I'm not sure I'd ever seen that before in a major college football game in this conference, at least not in the modern era. But we did see Rutgers play Washington pretty tough. They held them to 100 yards rushing. Purdue's obviously off to a surprising start. We'll talk more about them in a moment because they play our Wolverines on Saturday. And Illinois got off to a 2-0 start, including winning 2 games prior to Friday's meltdown, but they won 2 games as an underdog. So is the bottom of the league getting better, Bill, do you think, or not?
The very bottom, I'm not so sure. I'm not real sure about Illinois or Rutgers right now, but Maryland definitely improved, coming off a bye week, looking very good. Michigan State's better, and if they can really make a statement if they beat Notre Dame. And Purdue's kind of the hot team now. We can talk. I'll save my prediction and all those kind of things for Michigan for a little bit. But yeah, definitely Brahms brought some creativity to the passing game. They're throwing the football better. They took it to Missouri. So I would look at it like this. I mentioned the playoff contenders. I think the middle of the Big Ten looks really good. But the very bottom, the Rutgers, the Illinois, and Northwestern's been a little bit of a disappointment early as well.
Let's go to Northwestern. Because I agree they've been a bit of a disappointment. I'm not shocked they lost to Duke. Those two teams play a lot in the non-conference. There's a lot of familiarity there. David Cutcliffe is considered one of the best teachers in the game, very similar to a Pat Fitzgerald. But that box score, Bill, was not your typical Northwestern September, we didn't show up, we're a developmental program and we're better in November non-conference loss we see every year. Duke had a 4-1 advantage in total yardage almost. 4-1. They were absolutely physically dominated in that game. That is not something we're used to seeing under Pat Fitzgerald. In your view, as we head into Big Ten play, is that a one-off or was that a warning sign?
Probably more of a warning sign because, to me, I thought they would be that sleeper in the Big Ten, that team that maybe challenges Wisconsin for the Big Ten West, and we'll find out in a week. Obviously, they play soon. But it basically opened the door to trying to find that second-best team in the Big Ten West. Is it Minnesota with P.J. Fleck? They're off to a good start. Is it Iowa? I think it is Iowa, and I think they're going to give Penn State a good shot this weekend. But and then you look at Nebraska. I mean, probably nobody feels worse in the Big Ten than them right now after the loss against Northern Illinois. So that's kind of what Northwestern's loss did. It basically, how do I want to say, opened the door for, I was wrong, first off, about them as a sleeper, and then kind of trying to figure out who's actually going to challenge the Badgers in that division.
Bill Bender from the Sporting News with us here on Michigan Podcast, previewing the full beginning in earnest of Big Ten play starting this week here in college football. All right, let's go through the West. There was a perception coming into the season. It was Wisconsin. There was the Badger Invitational, Wisconsin or bust. They've looked very impressive the first few games, but, Utah State got housed by 40 at Wake Forest. Florida Atlantic, it was not good, already in the middle of a hurricane. BYU, I think, had one offensive touchdown against Portland State. Didn't cross midfield against LSU, which just suffered one of the worst losses by a ranked team to an unranked team in the last 15 years in college football. And then had to play a backup quarterback. So, their schedule hasn't been all that daunting. But in your mind, is this division still the Badger Invitational, Bill?
Yeah, and I think, when we talk on a national basis all the time about the playoff discussion, and I'll be the first to admit it, it really goes around Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, because you just repeat those Big Ten East teams. But Wisconsin looks probably like the most complete team right now with what they've got on defense, with what they've got on offense. Taylor's been great at tailback. The difference between them and Michigan right now, for all the complaints about Michigan and the red zone offense, Alex Hornibrook threw 4 touchdowns in the red zone last week on the road against BYU. So if that continues, the Badgers are just going to, they've probably got the cleanest look at an undefeated season in the Big Ten in the regular season. But for them, as you and I both know, it's going to come down to, can you beat Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan and Indianapolis, all schools they lost to by a touchdown last year?
You mentioned Iowa. I agree with you. I think they will give Penn State a good game this weekend. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they won, because they're a team that's built a lot like Michigan under Harbaugh. Very similar pro styles between Ferentz and Harbaugh. Strong in the trenches. I still think there's some doubt about where Penn State is at there, coming off the rebuilding from the Sandusky scandals and sanctions. Skill position-wise, though, we know what Penn State has. They're extremely good there. But the one thing Iowa does have that Penn State's not going to face often in the Big Ten this year is, with Penn State, their margin for error is higher because you can hold them down for 3.5 quarters, take one bad angle against Saquon Barkley, miss one tackle in the open field, and the game's over, you lost. That gives you a margin for error they've not had the last few years. You know who also has that margin for error? Iowa does. With Akram Wadley. We saw Akram Wadley win the game at Iowa State by himself, which they were way behind at the last 6 minutes. He put him on their shoulders. He is a very similar player to Saquon Barkley. If you take one bad angle, make one bad play, he takes you to the house, and suddenly a game that it looks like you were going to pull it out is a loss. That is not a weapon Kirk Ferentz has had a lot in his coaching tenure. Probably, I can't think of a time they've ever really had a weapon like that. You got to go back to when Hayden Fry was there, when they had guys like Tavian Banks and Ronnie Harmon. That's the kind of weapon Akram Wadley is. And you get him in a game on a national stage where Saquon Barkley's getting all the hype. Everybody forgets this was a guy that people like Pro Football Focus had rated as a first-round NFL draft pick heading into this season. This is almost the exact same spot we saw Iowa shock Michigan last year in, isn't it? At night, ABC, national TV, double-digit underdog. Didn't we see this game last year?
I'm glad you brought it up, because that's exactly what I'm writing about for us this week. Just the power of the night game at Kinnick Stadium. They seem to get a juice off of that. They've played big games in the past against Penn State, against Michigan, like you said last year. Wadley was the star in that game, and that's how they're going to have to use the same formula to beat Penn State. I mean, like you said, all it takes is one play from Barkley, and this is a Penn State team that kind of wore Iowa out in Happy Valley last year. But all that said, I think the spread looks a little high. I think Iowa will hang around, play off the emotion of Kinnick. That's a tough place to play at night. I mean, that's the beauty of the Big Ten football. I mean, other conferences play at night all the time. I think when Big Ten schools do it, because it doesn't happen as often, it makes for some very special atmospheres, and Iowa certainly will have that on Saturday night.
I think the problem Iowa has, correct me if I'm wrong though, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Nebraska, aren't those all on the road?
Yeah, they've got a brutal schedule.
Yeah, those are your biggest divisional opponents, and they're all on the road. That's the issue with them. Let's go to Nebraska. Now, I have been skeptical from day one. Now, I do a podcast, actually, with a friend of mine who runs Hawkeye Nation, the website. And, he went back and pulled out the podcast I did with him the day Mike Riley was hired 4 years, or back in 2014. And I just said I thought it was a bad fit, didn't make any sense. You're going through another schematic change. He doesn't have a natural recruiting base in the region, so it's going to take him a year or two to convince West Coast kids to come out there. And then given his age, even if it worked, you were going to make this exact same move in 4 or 5 years anyway, because he was already 62 years old when you hired him for the job. And they hired him in like a week. So I don't know what kind of a search they did. And so here we are, and they're off to a 1-2 start, and it's a bad-looking 1-2. The comeback against Oregon, Bill, if you looked at that box score, they still had barely 100 yards rushing and had under 50% completion. So I think that was more of Oregon just kind of thought the game was over and kind of quit playing. And I don't know why anybody thought a kid who couldn't complete barely 50% of his passes at Tulane was going to come in and save Nebraska. The whole argument, well, he's got better players around him. Well, that's all mitigated by the fact he's playing against better players too, and he hasn't even started playing Big Ten defenses yet, and he's got 7 interceptions. That seems like they might be in some existential trouble there, Bill.
Well, you mentioned the fit, and what they did when they fired Bo Pelini, or he resigned, was they overcorrected the other way. They went with a coach that screams and yells to a guy that doesn't. Riley has a forever positive persona, and even in the Big Ten teleconference this week, same thing. So, but you're right about fit, and it could end up resembling Michigan in a way. And I say that because if you look down at Central Florida, Scott Frost is doing a fantastic job.
Agreed.
He won a national championship, right?
Yep.
And I think that's the name that they'll end up clamoring for, and it'll be on whether Scott Frost wants to coach at Nebraska or not.
I think that's more like a Tom Herman situation. You're right with the favorite son with Harbaugh and Scott Frost, but you have to wonder if Tom Herman wasn't sitting there in their own backyard and wasn't poised to go get a huge check at LSU from a neighboring state that can just go in there and recruit Texas from LSU, you have to wonder if Charlie Strong would have been given another year. But when that guy is your favorite son in your own backyard, and you think he's a once-in-a-decade coach, you can't let him walk away. And I've said since the start of the year, I think that Mike Riley's in that situation with Scott Frost. He took Central Florida from 0-12 to a bowl game. If he gets them back to a bowl game this year, he's going to be on every Power 5 AD's wish list for a head coach, especially when you throw in his resume at Oregon as part of a national championship team with an exciting offense and his Nike ties. And if you're a Nebraska fan and you're sitting there 5-7, 6-6, and 7-5, you really want to watch him go coach at Arizona State or Arizona or someplace like that when you had him in your own backyard all along, Bill.
Right. That'll be the big debate, because if you look at the coaching candidates this year, there isn't a Tom Herman. There's not a PJ Fleck. Mm-hmm. There's not that young, hot candidate that's more guys are going to chase Chip Kelly now. Guys are going to chase, Bob Stoops to no avail. Even a Bill O'Brien's name has been popping up a little bit. But, so I think that's a good point. And if Nebraska doesn't make a bowl game or goes 6-6 and, loses ground to a P.J. Fleck at Minnesota and loses to Purdue with Jeff Brom, these are both possible. I mean, right now, if Nebraska and Purdue played, who are you taking? You're probably taking Purdue.
Purdue beat them 2 years ago, remember?
Right.
They beat them in West Lafayette 2 years ago. So there you go.
Yeah, so I think that's what... they're going to have a decision. And as Lee Barfmeck wrote, an excellent columnist in Omaha this week, it's not just about the coaches and the players. It's all the way up in the administration.
Oh, you bet.
Nebraska definitely has an identity crisis, and it's not going to be solved overnight.
There's a reason Sean Eichhorst, the AD there, was front and center, because it's his rear end in the sling on this one. He's the one that said, Bo Pelini lost 4 games every year. And by the way, Nebraska's lost at least 4 games in a season every season since they fired Frank Solich. That stat's incredible. Okay? So it's one thing to fire Bo Pelini for winning 9 games and losing 4 every year. It's another thing, though, to replace him and have the program go all Bill Callahan-y after you make this kind of a move. You mentioned P.J. Fleck. You've already touched a little bit on Purdue. These are 2 first-year coaches already making a name for themselves. Different, though. And it's funny, too, the contrast between the two, because Fleck's the guy with the Harbaugh-esque flamboyance, charismatic personality, yet he actually comes out of the Tressel school. He's very now, they threw a lot with Western and Corey Davis and Zach Terrell, but if you look at his style of play, he's more comfortable running a power spread, playing field position. So he's got this personality of flamboyance, but he's really an old-school guy. On the other hand, Jeff Brom sounds like he coached under Jim Tressel, but he's the air raid, throw it all over the field guy. Nonetheless, they're both off to very good starts at their new school. So which one's for real, or do you think they both are?
I think they both are. I think with Purdue and Minnesota, here's what I wrote earlier this week. If you're Purdue or Minnesota, you have 2 choices. You can either recruit big offensive linemen and try to win in the trenches like Wisconsin and Iowa, and in theory Nebraska should, or you can do something to offset that. In my lifetime, the most success Purdue ever had was doing something different.
Joe Tiller.
Yes, the basketball and grass. And that's what I see with Brom. Yep. They're throwing it around. They're going to be a tough out. It's suddenly an intriguing game with Michigan this week. And then Minnesota, I'm glad you said that because you see what I see, and that's that for all the flash and the row the boat and all those things Fleck does, what he did at Western Michigan was a power running team. And it's very much like what Urban Meyer does. And they've got good running backs just like he had at Western. I don't know if the offensive line's good enough to win the Big Ten West, but that's another game when Michigan plays them, they're not going to, because I could just see P.J. Fleck throwing it all in for the brown jug and all those kind of things. That's one Michigan can't take that game off, that's for sure.
No doubt. Plus, if you look at the schedule, I don't think we play them again for the foreseeable future. So, if you're PJ Fleck, this could conceivably, because you have success, you got to think he might be at another school in 4 or 5 years. This might be his lone chance to get that little brown jug while he's there. So you're right. I think they will put a lot into that game, as they always do. Now let's go over to the East. Here's a question I have. So if you think enough of USC that you're ranking them in the top 5 after holding on in double overtime to beat Texas that they were favored by 17 points against, then can you explain to me why you don't have Maryland ranked when they went to Texas, that same Texas team, and they 50-burgered them with 2 freshman quarterbacks? That makes no sense to me. Tell me who's got a more impressive – tell me there are 25 teams in college football that have a better road win than Maryland does right now, Bill.
I don't think so. I mean, Maryland probably should be ranked, and they're going to be an interesting out for some those contenders in the Big Ten, the Big Three. You wonder, can Maryland pick off a Penn State or a Michigan or Ohio State? And I don't have it in front of me. The score that Ohio State and Michigan put up on Maryland last year was bad. They were 2 blowouts back to back.
Mm-hmm.
So, clearly they had learned from that. They had the quarterback injury. That's too bad. But, DJ Durkin's a good coach, better facilities, and Maryland appears to be a team that, with the recruiting that they had last year, which did get some attention, they could be on their way up into the middle. I can't say they're going to beat Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State year in, year out, but they can at least compete.
Michigan State, what do you make of their 2-0 start? The box scores look the way that they used to look. They're supposed to look. They even when they were winning 11 or more games 5 out of 6 years, they weren't housing like MAC teams. That's just not their style of football. They go for that 200-200 balance, solid defense, field position. I mean, that the box scores against Bowling Green and Western Michigan looked the way that they were supposed to look under Mark D'Antonio and his better years. But do you get the feel like they're going to have a strong rebound, or is the jury still out until Notre Dame on Saturday night?
It's a good proving game for both teams, because if Notre Dame loses, then we're going to talk more about Brian Kelly in the hot seat. And then Michigan State loses, you wonder what's different from last year. They do have, Michigan coming soon. They've got to play, in a division where they're kind of being looked at as, at minimum, or at best, probably the 4th best team. So it's a big game for them. The one thing with them, though, I was looking at team defensive stats, and they're right there with Michigan in terms of statistical overall defense. Like you said, they're going to win ugly when they do. Not going to be an easy walk. That's not going to be a cakewalk game for Michigan by any stretch, because they're teams that are similar in some ways. But I like Michigan's defense a little better. I like Michigan's defense as much as I like any defense in the FBS right now.
I actually think, and this isn't disrespect for Sparty, it's really not. I actually went to school at Michigan State because my ACT score wasn't high enough to get me into Michigan. And I rooted for Michigan the entire time, and people on campus hated me. All right? But I actually think Purdue this week is a tougher game. I'm not saying they're better than Michigan State, but here's why. The timing of playing Purdue, they have a lot of confidence. Now, I kind of thought it was strange watching the BTN crew wax poetic for a week about Purdue only losing by a touchdown to Louisville when Louisville dropped the ball on the 1-yard line twice and had over 600 yards. I thought to myself, hey, that was great you covered the line, but you can't. That's not a replicatable model of football. Well, it doesn't really matter what me or even the Big Ten Network crew thinks. What really matters is what the Purdue players think. And it's clear that they got a lot of confidence off of this. The next week, they go up against Ohio from the MAC. Now, that's a game they've lost the last 5 years. Ohio is considered one of the favorites in that league. They opened up a can on them, won that game by 20 points. Then at Missouri. Now, we know Missouri looked last week against South Carolina like it was about to shut her down, and they fired their defensive coordinator. But you know what a good team does to a team like that? Put them down right away. Don't even let them breathe. Don't let them up like you saw Wisconsin do to BYU. And that's exactly what Purdue did when they went into their crib. Now, I would guess maybe 2 of Purdue's starting players on Saturday would start for Michigan, and I might be being kind. But the confidence level they have and the timing of that matchup, that makes it scary for Michigan. On the other hand, when you look at the Michigan State game, when we were just talking about Sparty, their next 3 games, Bill, are all going to be tough, physical maulers. This is not the Notre Dame team of throwing the ball all over the field. I mean, they just had a quarterback set their rushing record. For a quarterback, 2 games ago, they had 300-yard rushers. They're playing to their defense. They were openly trying to win a slugfest against Georgia the other week. I mean, they're going to play physical football on Saturday night. After that, they've got Iowa. We always know that that's a physical style of football. And then you play Michigan on that 3rd week. You're going to get beat up those first 2 games. I actually think the timing of the Purdue game is scarier for Michigan because of that.
Yeah, and it could be, but here's the thing, and I'm looking at that line, 10-point line. It probably went down since. I haven't really checked it today, but I think Michigan's going to cover in this game, and it's probably going to be like right on the line. I could see Purdue coming out, like you said, with that confidence, maybe scoring early. It's a home game. Wilton Speight and some young receivers are going to have to react to that. But if Michigan finishes a few of these drives, not all of them, a few of them in the red zone, they'll be fine. And because of that defense. I think that defense, the pressure will get home. And like you said, the talent can win out. But it is, unlike last week and maybe even to some extent the game against Cincy, Michigan's going to have to, score in the red zone, not have 3 or 4, 3 turnovers. You have 3 turnovers on the road, you're in trouble. So, protect the ball, score in the red zone, Michigan will be fine.
So if you're over at the Big Ten front offices right now, Bill, are you rooting against Ohio State every week? And here's why I bring that up. If they go on and win the Big Ten, even if they win out, we all know what the argument's going to be in December when it comes time to choose those 4 teams for the playoffs. The argument's going to be same argument that worked against the Big 12 the last few years. Well, who'd they beat in the non-conference? They had 1 real non-conference game, and they got their lunch handed to them by Oklahoma. So what does that say about the Big Ten, that's your champion? Is that a concern, what happened in that Oklahoma game? Is that a concern for the rest of the conference in your mind?
It is, but Ohio State's Ohio State. Their brand's big enough that if they get it together, they'd be given the benefit of the doubt, not over Oklahoma, but perhaps over a Pac-12 team. I'll tell you this, over the last 3 weeks, I've seen Alabama. They're going to win the SEC. Mm-hmm. I've seen Oklahoma and Ohio State, and I think Oklahoma State will be an interesting – they've got to play twice. So – and then Clemson, I'm almost ready to pencil them in. I think Clemson's the best team in the country right now. And I'm not trying to be cute about that. I think they've got the best offense-defense combination. So to answer your question, I think Ohio State, you want them to keep winning. And I say that because you want Michigan and Penn State to be undefeated when they play at Happy Valley. Then you want the winner of that game probably to be undefeated when they play, if it's Michigan, when they play Wisconsin. If it's Penn State, when they play Ohio State. And you want Ohio State, Michigan to have a comparable stage. I don't know if it'll be exactly the same as last year, but something comparable to that was the best regular season game of the year last year. Mm-hmm. And you want that. So I think, and then if you get Wisconsin versus one of those big 3, it should be enough in theory to have a very strong argument for a Big Ten team being in the playoff, which I think is what's going to end up happening.
So let's wrap this up, Bill. Who faces off in Indianapolis first Saturday night in December in the Big Ten championship game, and then who's the team that you know, even though you can't pick them, you just have a feeling they're going to screw up your predictions, everybody's template, everybody's paradigm. You just can't go out on a limb and pick them, but you just know they're going to be the spoiler here. How would you answer those 2 questions?
Well, preseason prediction was Ohio State, Wisconsin. And I'm going to stick with it for now because I think Ohio State's going to beat Penn State at home. And I think they can get back to Indianapolis that way. But that's not – and the team that can mess this up right now is Michigan because Michigan, if they get their – Michigan has the best defense in the Big Ten. And if Speight basically plays, under control, doesn't turn the ball over a lot – they can go in and win in Happy Valley. They can, and then if they win at if Michigan wins it at Penn State, I'll change my answer to Michigan because I think they could lose to a Wisconsin and still get into that Ohio State game, which I don't have to tell you guys in Ann Arbor that Michigan has to win that Ohio State game before they get to Indy anyway. So I'm sticking with Ohio State, Wisconsin for now, but Penn State and Michigan are right there.
Bill Bender from the Sporting News does some great work covering college football all around the country. Very kind with his time to join us this week on Michigan Podcast. It was good to see you again, Bill. Thanks for being with us, brother. We really appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. Let's do it again soon. Appreciate it.
You bet. We'll come back. More Michigan Podcast in a moment. Back here on Michigan Podcast, let's take a look at my Big Ten power ratings here heading into conference play. Let's start at the bottom. Rutgers, hey, they beat Morgan State 65-0, whatever that means. Illinois comes in at number 13. They just had no answer for South Florida's offense on Friday night. Really a setback loss for the Illini coming off of 2 home wins. Nebraska at number 12, man, the Mike Riley death watch is on. You just heard us talking about that with Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Number 11, Northwestern. Bowling Green turns out to be the Mark Gray slump buster that they needed, but I still can't get over how poorly they played at Duke, how much they were dominated in that game. Number 10 in my Big Ten power ratings, Indiana. Hoosiers lost that hurricane-canceled game to Florida International. I hope that does not come back to haunt them with regard to bowl eligibility later. Sparty's at number 9. We're going to find out if they're truly back the next few weeks, beginning with a nationally televised primetime clash against Notre Dame. And Minnesota, they had that opener, but the Fighting PJ Flex, they have rebounded to absolutely dominate the past 2 weeks and crushed a pretty good group of 5 team in Middle Tennessee State, although they were without their starting quarterback, who's their best player, so that probably had something to do with it. Now we go to the top. I've got Purdue at number 7, and given where their program was at coming into this year, you could argue that they have played the toughest non-conference slate so far, and they have played well. Iowa at number 6, they had a bit of an emotional letdown, a couple key injuries, some terrible officiating. You see a high-stepping call on Akram Wadley. That was just beyond ridiculous, taking that touchdown off the board. Nonetheless, they got a sluggish win against North Texas. Number 5 is Maryland. I think by the end of the season, that win at Texas in the opener is going to look even more impressive than it does right now. And then we get to, I agree with Bill Bennett from the Sporting News, clearly the top 4 teams in the conference, and I'm fine with whatever order. To me, Penn State has to be number 1. And I think they're going to be there until somebody takes it from them in my power ratings. 2, 3, and 4, though, you can rank them in any order you want. I really think we're splitting hairs. Here's why I have Michigan number 2, and it has nothing to do with the fact we're Michigan podcast. It has to do with, I agree with Bill Bender again. I think the best unit on this list is the Michigan defense. I think that's the best unit on the list. Now, you may disagree. You may think Ohio State's got better overall talent. You may think Wisconsin has a more balanced team and is playing better right now, and you would put them above the Wolverines, and if that's you get no argument out of me. We're kind of splitting hairs at this stage. I just think maybe a better thing to do right now with the Big Ten is to put teams in tiers. I'm going to put Penn State in its own tier because they're the defending champ, and they're just taking names right now. So the great prophet Ric Flair once said, to be the man, you got to beat the man, right? So until somebody walks that aisle and takes Penn State down, they're going to be number 1, although I think they're going to have a very difficult game against Iowa on Saturday. And then I think you have your primary contending tier, and that's Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin. Put them in any order you want. And then I think you have this next tier. Maryland, I would put in there. Iowa, I'd put in there. Purdue, Minnesota, Indiana, and Northwestern. And I think one of those 2 teams has a chance to break into that contending tier as the year goes on. That's kind of how I would maybe put if I were to put them in blocks of teams. That's probably how I would tier the squads in the Big Ten. Now, if I had a vote in the AP poll, here's how I would have ranked the top 25 this week. San Diego State 2-0 now against the Pac-12. They beat Stanford on Saturday. Louisville drops to 24. TCU, Florida gets back into my top 25 with the win at Tennessee, or the win against Tennessee with that Hail Mary. West Virginia, Kentucky should be in the rankings. Kentucky now trying to break the longest streak of futility against one team in college football. 30 in a row, I think they've lost to Florida. They get the Gators at home this week. We'll see if they can break that streak. Auburn at number 19. Vanderbilt breaks in at number 18. They've given up 1 offensive touchdown in 3 games. It is not often you see a Bill Snyder offense shut down. They shut Kansas State down on Saturday. So I've got Vanderbilt in my poll, Washington State, and Notre Dame at number 16, heading into East Lansing on Saturday night. Number 15, I think Maryland belongs in the poll. I keep asking, tell me which 25 teams in college football have a better road win than they do. I can't come up with that list. So I have the Terps at number 15, Mississippi State coming off the mauling against LSU, Washington, who hasn't played anybody at all, Florida State, Virginia Tech, How about Fred Jackson's kid, by the way? Let's pause there for a second. Fred Jackson, if you're a Michigan fan, you know that name. Fred was our running backs coach, offensive coordinator for like 20 years here at Michigan. His kid, Josh Jackson, right now is just lighting it up as a redshirt freshman quarterback at Virginia Tech. So congratulations to Fred Jackson, a Michigan man, gave a lot to the program for so many years, was part of a lot of great football teams. I'm sure he's very proud of his son and given his performance so far this year. He should be. So I've got Virginia Tech at number 11 in my poll as we get now into the top 10. Georgia, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Michigan. There's a reason I put Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin back to back to back, because to me, I think it's really hard to differentiate, so I just put them all in a row. I've got USC at number 6, and now we go to my top 5 teams in the AP poll. Both the Oklahoma schools, Oklahoma State, Penn State, Oklahoma, Alabama. And I didn't set this up. I keep agreeing with Bill Bender a lot, but I agree. Clemson is number 1. The one doubt I had about them was at quarterback. You lose the best player in your history of your program in Deshaun Watson. I'm not saying Kelly Bryant's that good, but if he's going to throw the ball down the field consistently, the way he did against Louisville on Saturday night, I don't think anybody's beating them, at least to the playoff, because that defensive front is just too good. So I think Clemson, much like Penn State, they've established themselves early in the year, and just like I think Penn State should be number 1 in your Big Ten power ratings until somebody beats them, I think the same thing about the top 25. I think Clemson should be number 1 until somebody beats them. And now that we're heading into conference play, my Heisman poll, and you only get to vote for 3 on your Heisman ballot. This would be my Heisman ballot this week. Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma, number 1. Saquon Barkley at Penn State, number 2. Mason Rudolph at Oklahoma State, number 3. Now, in the Vegas rankings right now, Vegas odds, the top 2 guys in the Heisman ballots are Mayfield and Rudolph. The last time we had 2 guys from the same state finish 1 and 2 in the Heisman Trophy, 1967. Gary Beeben, UCLA, won it. A guy named Orenthal James Simpson from USC, who went on to be known for something a lot more tragic than football. He finished 2nd. This week's Twitter poll results, if you want to follow us on Twitter, at Michigan Podcast. What would the outcome be of Michigan-Purdue on Saturday? 46% of you believe Michigan will win by more than a touchdown. 23% believe Purdue's going to win. That actually finished 2nd. 19% Michigan by a touchdown or less. 12% of you say it is too close to call. So put those 2 numbers together. 1/3 of you that follow us on Twitter believe either Michigan's going to lose or the game's too close to call. Clearly, Michigan's offense, particularly in the dead zone, which is supposed to be the red zone, is rattling a good portion of the fan base, and I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. This week's question of the week here on Michigan Podcast comes from Some Little Shoe. I like that. Some Little Shoe on our YouTube page. He asks, if we don't see clear improvement this weekend, is Wilton Speight still to blame, or is it other people? All right, well, listen. Wilton Speight's performance in the red zone. We had this stat at the top of the show today. 1 out of 13 passing for -1 yard. I could do that. No, really, I could. And so could all of you watching who have full motor function. Scratch that. At least half of you without full motor function could probably do that as well. I mean, that is systemically sorry. But when you're also, what were one of the other stats we had? 20 carries for 36 yards. Come on. You've got issues. Wilton Speight's play is an issue, but you've got issues beyond that. Now, far be it for me to tell a head coach who makes $9 million a year, who has earned it, who in 3 years now has Michigan in the top 10 for the 18th time. Michigan wasn't in the top 10 18 total times for the 10 years prior to Coach Harbaugh's arrival, okay? So far be it for me to tell our coach with that resume, and if he wins on Saturday, he'll have the best 30-game record at Michigan since a guy named Bo, okay? And did I mention he might be the best quarterback coach on planet Earth? Far be it for me, though, to tell him how to do his job, but I will. Okay? Can we actually throw the ball in the end zone, maybe? And no, I don't mean these fade routes that Wilton Speight's just bad at, okay? His idea of a fade route is, the third row of the bleachers. I mean, these things are over the guy's head by 20 yards. They're not even close to catchable within the astral plane, all right? Can we throw the ball in the end zone, north and south maybe, over the middle of the field to a tight end, one of these big tight ends we recruited, these big, tall, fast for tight end guys? Could we try that? No more of this side-to-side stuff. No more of the fade routes that, those sitting in those premium seating first-row seats have a better chance of catching than our receivers. Could we actually throw the ball in the end zone over the middle? I'm not asking for much. Not claiming I know more than Coach Harbaugh. I'm a Harbaugh slappy, but here's what I do know watching a lot of football the last 30-plus years. If you don't make teams defend the middle of the field, you're a lot easier to defend. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Hey, don't forget, by the way, support us on our Patreon page. Those of you who love what we're doing, you get access to my exclusive instant reaction podcast after every game, as well as my picks, including the Michigan game each week, are on our Patreon page. We'll see you again next week here at Michigan Podcast.